Okay. And hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program. It is a huge old collaboration between the Morrill Memorial Library, Together Yes, Progress Norwood, Norwood Community Media, and of course, our keynote speaker, so to speak, the Neponset Valley Watershed Association. Sorry, Neponset River Watershed Association. Thank you. We're very pleased to have you here this evening to talk about preparing for extreme weather in Norwood. My name is Liz Reed. I'm the head of the Adult Services Department at the Morrill Memorial Library in Norwood. I'm going to turn the floor over to Susan Clare of Together Yes in just a moment, and then we'll move the program straight along to Holly from our town of Norwood, as well as Carrie and Patrick from Neponset River Watershed. So Susan, if you'd like to speak up, the floor is yours. Sure can.
I managed it. I did a few clicks here and there. I am Susan Clare. I'm the director of Together Yes. Progress Norwood has joined with Together Yes and is equally responsible for all of our sustainability series. And thank goodness, because they've been quite an addition. We plan more for you, and we'll have 2 presentations in April that you should be watching for. Announcements will be sent out. Thank you for coming, and learn and ask questions. Let's take care of these situations before they happen.
All right, so between Patrick, Carrie, and Holly, please take it away.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here really quickly. All right, we should be set up. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As you kind of figured out, we have kind of a 3-part presentation tonight, myself and Carrie and then Holly. My part in this thing is to give a little bit of background information and knowledge so that then Carrie and Holly can kind of build on it and bring it home locally to you all. So I'm going to kind of touch generally on everything here, and get us rolling here. So I'm going to talk tonight, as you can see by the title slide, about extreme weather and stormwater and how it kind of relates to everything. I'm going to kind of give some definitions so that we're all starting on the same page. Then I want to talk about the issues that come from these things. And then I just want to get in a few tips of things that we can each do individually to try and help these issues just in our day-to-day lives. And then I'm going to finish up by just quickly going over a few things the municipal government is looking at. And then I think Carrie and Holly are going to expand on that a little bit more. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, we'll just start with some definitions, some basic things. Extreme weather, in the context of what I'm talking about tonight, I pretty much I'm talking about flooding and drought. Those are the 2 big things I'm talking about tonight that we're going to kind of go over. So those 2 main events, and then when I say stormwater, I figure that's the one that might need a little bit more of a definition, possibly. So I want to make sure we all understand this term. It might not be what you were thinking initially, but stormwater is so wrapped up in the middle of these extreme weather events that it's just important to talk about it at the same time. So stormwater, so the question of what is stormwater really starts with our landscape, right? We live in a very developed area, and there is a lot of what we call impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces are where we have taken the ground as it exists, the dirt, and we have covered it with a layer of something that doesn't soak up water. So our roofs, our sidewalks, our blacktops, everything. And now when it rains, rather than soaking into the ground, that rainwater or that snow melt runs off. And that runoff is what we call stormwater. And really, you might be wondering where it goes, and maybe you're already aware. The cartoon kind of shows it here. Stormwater will run off of these impervious surfaces, and in most of our areas, they will run to what we call the storm drain system. You've probably seen the grates. You may have seen them and never paid any attention to them, because as long as they're functioning, it's kind of one of those things out of sight, out of mind. But like this cartoon shows, the water would run to that grate. Those grates are then connected to a series of pipes, and those pipes lead right to the nearest waterway. The important part here is there is no filtration and no treatment on that flow whatsoever. That is key to understanding the issues. Some of the issues tonight is that anything that enters that storm drain goes in the creek. So if you look out the window and you see a candy wrapper floating down the road during a storm, some sort of storm, that candy wrapper is probably going to the stream. So very, very important. Here I've just thrown a few real world pictures to kind of bring that that cartoon to life. On the left is the grates or the inlets. They come in different shapes and sizes. You might have seen them as curb cuts or just holes in the curb, things like that. Often you'll see them like this as well. And on the right, it shows the outlet. So it goes into that grate through the pipes, and that's where it ends up. That's where the stormwater ends up, is a pipe at the stream. It is not an elegant setup or anything. It is literally just the end of a pipe, and everything flows out of it. It's a very efficient solution, but as you'll see, we have a few issues that are associated that we need to be aware of. Now that we have our definitions, we'll move into the issues that we want to talk about tonight that we want to be aware of. First is flooding, and I'm sure that's high on everyone's mind right now. Because of climate change, we're getting more intense storms more frequently. Right? Climate change is making those intense peaks and valleys in precipitation. It's making them even more pronounced. It can lead to flooding. And really there's two sides to this coin. First of all, there's the climate change and kind of more natural side of we're getting a lot more precipitation and it floods, but there's also this stormwater side. That's why I introduced stormwater here. The storm drain system, as we all know, this area has been developed for a very long time. And so our storm drain systems have been in place for a very long time. When they were installed, the storms were very, very different. We know that. And on top of that, even storm drain systems that are installed today, the rule is that they are installed according to precipitation data from the 1960s. Now, my asterisk there is they're working on changing that right now, which is important. But currently, they're installed and sized using precipitation data from the 1960s. And we all know the storms are much different now than they were 60 years ago. So my point here is we have storm drain systems that are sized to old precipitation data, and at the same time, we have increasing intensity of storms. So we kind of have this double problem here that can lead to flooding and issues like that. We also, associated with climate change as well, we have issues of drought. Like I say, climate change not only brings more intense periods of rain, but also more intense periods of drought as well. Along with that, we also have the human side of it, that we are using water and at times we're using too much water, especially during drought periods, and it is exacerbating the effects here. Now, I will also say Norwood, I believe, is an MWRA community. So the stuff that I'm saying tonight, maybe a little bit different for Norwood since it's getting the water that you use from MWRA, but still, conservation and drought awareness is a good thing. So I figured we'd kind of touch on that as well, because last summer we had a terrible drought period. So another issue related to that. And then the third issue we're going to talk about tonight is stormwater pollution. So we have this system of pipes that efficiently moves our water away from our infrastructure and to our streams so it can keep flowing. The problem is that that system is so efficient and so accessible that other things flow to it too, pollution specifically. When we as users and as residents are not paying enough attention to this issue, pollution gets swept away along with the stormwater as well. So pollution really falls into two categories. Stormwater pollution. The first is direct pollution, where we have folks that just dump things directly into drains, which is a problem, but also a very easily identifiable one. There is another category that's indirect pollution that is much harder to find and to address. And the idea here is there is a pollutant spilled on the ground that under its own power would not move to the storm drain. But we get these intense rain events, really any rain event, and it moves the pollution. So my example here is this car that's been leaking. You might see that and say, oh, it's a stain, it's not going anywhere, it's not flowing. You're right, except you also know when it rains, that's going to sweep it all away and into a storm drain, and as we know now, to our streams. So like I say, 2 categories of pollution. And I wanted to touch on some common stormwater pollutants again, just to kind of get us all on the same page here, because there's obvious ones that I'm sure is on everybody's mind right now as I start talking about this stuff. Oil, chemicals, fertilizer, pet waste. The things that we know are nasty, are a problem. Things that have warnings on their labels, things that we know shouldn't be discharged to the environment. But there's also not so obvious stuff that we really need to be aware of, because these can cause a lot of problems as well. Simply dirt. If a lot of dirt and mud gets into the storm drain system and into the creek, it can settle on the creek bed and really change that environment and that habitat for the organisms that depend on it. Leaves and grass clippings, as they decay, they use up oxygen in the stream, and they can also release an excess of nutrients, which leads to those algal blooms, particularly the toxic algal blooms that we worry so much about. Also, ice melt. That's one that slips through a lot of minds. We think of ice melt as a safe thing, a safety thing. We need to put it out to be safe, and that's correct. We want to make sure our surfaces are safe. But at some point, we're doing harm as well. If we're putting too much out, it's going to go somewhere. As that snow melts, now we know where it's going to go. It's going to go to the storm drain system. And then my last not so obvious one is environmentally friendly and biodegradable products. And, I've run into that a lot. I've worked in kind of pollution tracking before, and I've run into people saying, oh, well, it's environmentally friendly, it's not a problem. That's a marketing term. That is all it is. It is not, because it says environmentally friendly does not mean it is friendly to the environment. It means it is better than the other thing that's on the shelf next to it. It still does damage. So just because it's environmentally friendly, don't let your guard down in preventing pollution. So basically, to sum all this up, anything that's collected by stormwater that isn't stormwater is a stormwater pollutant. In an ideal world, the only thing getting taken to that storm drain is stormwater, pure stormwater. So, like I say, there's our issues, and I really sum them up into 3 categories. We have too much water, too little water, and dirty water. That's just to sum up what we're kind of touching on here. So what can we do as individuals, as residents, for each of those things to try and help our situation, to help those issues along? And so first we'll talk about too much water. One thing we can do around our houses that's pretty simple is rearrange our downspouts. I advise each of you, it's a very simple test. Just take a walk around your house this weekend if you've never noticed, and just see where your downspouts are going. If they are going onto our impervious surfaces, so if they're onto your driveway or onto the street, think about redirecting those into a grassy area, or like these folks did, into a garden that needs more water anyways. Because when our downspouts are directed onto our driveways or into the street, we are not giving the water from our roofs any chance to soak into the ground. We are taking all the water that hits our roofs during these intense rain events and saying, here, storm drain system, handle it all. And obviously that can add to our problem of overwhelming the system and causing flooding. So a much better solution is to try and redirect it to a way where the water has a chance to soak into something. Another option would be rain barrels. That's another popular option where it actually collects the water and you can use it later as needed. Another thing you can do to help out is I call it adopt your nearby drain. It's unofficial, nothing official here. But what I mean by this is if you happen to have a storm drain in front of your house, for instance, just recognize it, keep an eye on it. Our municipalities do a fantastic job of maintaining these systems and taking care of them. But if you happen to have a drain in front of your house, I guarantee you see that thing hundreds of more times a year than anyone from the town does, just because there's a finite amount of staff at the town and you're in and out of your driveway all the time. So just recognize that there's a drain out there and keep an eye on it. Watch for any maintenance issues. If you notice it backing up in a rainstorm, or if you notice something, maybe the grate is uneven, maybe the collar around it is broken or something like that. just give your town a call and say, hey, there's a drain here. I think there might be a problem. And they would love to catch problems before, well, they would love to catch issues before their actual problems. And then the other thing you can do, if it's safe, if you live on a nice, slow residential street and you feel able, is what's kind of shown in this picture here, particularly during the fall. If you notice a lot of leaves and everything accumulating around the grate, you can rake those out and just put them with your leaves from your yard to be managed properly. That's going to do several things. It's going to keep the grate from blocking up. It's also going to keep those leaves from getting into the storm drain system and possibly blocking the pipes. It is also going to, if the leaves were happen to get through all of that and get to the stream, it's also going to prevent the pollution that I talked about from leaves. So like I say, if you're able and if it's safe, that's another great way that you can kind of help maintain that free flow of water through the storm drain system. So that kind of covers too much water. Let's move to too little water now. So we're talking about things we can do to fix the issue of drought. The first and most active thing, I think, is fixing leaks. If we have a drippy faucet that we've been putting off, it makes a big difference. It really does. It adds up. So, you know, you can fix things like that around the house that are adding to this problem of water use. And also, so, I mean, that takes care of internal plumbing leaks, but we also have to remember there's the possibility of external leaks. So that's what the picture on the right is showing. If you happen to have a spot in your yard that is always wet, even when it hasn't rained in a while, and it happens to be right where your water lateral is, you may want to get it checked out. Or particularly like here, this is how I've seen it before too. If like the sidewalk is always wet in the summer and it hasn't rained for quite a while, it could be indicative of a problem, particularly if you have a water lateral nearby. And I'm relatively new to up here. I've been up here for just over a year and a half. I don't know if anybody has this situation, but where I used to work in the South, all our water meters were outside. So you can kind of check this by making sure all your faucets and all your water use is off in the house, and you can just go check your water meter, make sure it's not flowing. But I know where I'm at, my water meter's inside. I assume that might be common up here. But if you happen to have that situation, it's an easy way to check for leaks. Another thing you can do for water conservation is just whenever you replace something, make sure you replace it with something that is water efficient. So the big hitters here are washing machines and toilets. And you can always look for this water sense label on the product. You know, it's just kind of being an informed consumer. Look for that label, and that means it meets certain EPA criteria for water conservation for that particular thing. And this even applies to things that are smaller, your shower heads, your faucet aerators. You know, I mean, we do use those things every single day. So outfitting those with something that conserves a little bit of water goes a long way. And then lastly, it's really the thing that we've all heard, I think, since we were kids in elementary school. You know, don't leave the faucet on while you brush your teeth. Don't leave the faucet on while you wash your hands, that sort of thing. Just be mindful of when that water is flowing. And along with that, I included lawn irrigation here as well. If you happen to irrigate your lawn, do it very mindfully. Think about when you're doing it. I'd recommend, again, if this is something you're going to do, make sure your system is outfitted with some way to account for rainfall. If it rains on a Tuesday, you don't want your system turning on a Wednesday. It's a complete waste of water. It's a complete waste of your money because you're paying for the water. So, you know, think of some way to outfit your system to account for rainfall. Also, again, if you're going to irrigate, don't do it in the middle of the day. It's just all that water you're spraying, if you know, midday to early evening, it just evaporates. So again, just be mindful of how you use the water and make sure you're using it in the most efficient way possible. So we're going to move into my issue of dirty water now, the stormwater pollution, and what we can each do for that. The first thing is really my umbrella advice, because if you do this, it really catches everything else I'm going to talk about. Work it into your thinking that the pavement is directly connected to the stream. So my driveway is connected to the road. That's correct. That's connected to the storm drain system. That's connected to the stream. if I pour oil on my driveway, I might as well be pouring it right in the stream. So work that into your thinking. You know, at times we can be so far removed from the streams and from kind of the natural environment around us, we don't think about it. That's the driveway. That's not connected to the stream. But now we know it is. So if you think about that, you think about all the pavement that is connected, and you treat that pavement as though it is the stream, you will cut down on a lot of pollution. Moving into more specific things you can do. First and foremost, never dump anything in a storm drain. That's a very easy piece of advice to follow. If you've ever done it, don't ever do it again. If you've never done it, awesome. A lot of times these storm drains can be seen as easy, quick disposal pathways. And, you know, tonight, you know, as we've been talking, they're not. They are meant just to move stormwater. Summer's coming up. A lot of us like to wash our cars at home. If you choose to do that, well, first I'll mention if you go to a commercial car wash, the nice thing there is they collect the water and it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you choose to wash it at home, I just ask that you position everything in such a way that the runoff goes to the grass instead of out into the street, because we know now when it goes out into the street, eventually it's going to the storm drain. So try to get it to the grass or somewhere that it can soak in and stay on site. Also, properly manage yard waste. We've already kind of talked about the damage leaves and grass clippings can do. You can always compost them. You can take them somewhere that maybe they compost them, or obviously your town also has a collection program like this that you can take part in. So basically what I'm getting at here is just do not blow them out into the street. Don't, you know, blow them down to the stream bank. Don't, you know, put big piles on the stream bank, that sort of thing. Just manage it in a proper way. Well, also, this is a very big, I know, very big pet peeve, particularly in residential areas, but always properly dispose of pet waste. If you happen to have a dog, always pick up after it, dispose of the waste properly. That causes a lot of bacteria and that nutrient pollution in our streams as well. And fertilizer. So I've already touched on the damage that excess nutrients can do in our streams. They lead to those algal blooms, and particularly those toxic algal blooms that can be very threatening to the health of the organisms that use the stream, or even our pets or anything that goes wading into the water. So we want to be very careful with fertilizer, because fertilizer is so potent with these nutrients that we have to be careful with. I mean, my first piece of advice is don't use it. I personally don't use it, and I don't recommend anyone to use it. But, you know, I have to be realistic. And if you choose to use it, I just ask that you use it in the correct way, that you think about how you're using it, kind of like the water I was talking about earlier. Think about how you're doing it. I recommend getting a soil test so you know exactly what your lawn needs to be healthy, and then doing the math. I know it's tedious, but do the math for taking those soil test results and translating them into how much fertilizer you need to spread over such and such an area. And along with that, never spreading it on an impervious surface. So if you're spreading down your lawn and a little bit sprays over onto the sidewalk, make sure you sweep that up just to keep it, because if it's on the sidewalk, it's going to the stream because it's all connected. Okay, so that kind of wraps up a little bit about what we can each do. I'm going to really quickly generally go over some municipal efforts for stormwater and these extreme weather events. And then Carrie and Holly will dive into those a little bit deeper. So I'll be a little bit brief here, but some things I want you to be aware of. Our towns and Norwood also has been issued a permit by the Environmental Protection Agency for the stormwater system and storm drain system, excuse me. And basically what it is, the EPA says, okay, you're a developed area and you need a storm drain system to move the water. Well, that also opens up these issues that we've already been talking about tonight. So they have issued a permit to the town with a laundry list of things that they need to do to protect and improve water quality and stormwater quality. You know, as the years go on, that's really what they're designed at. Like I say, Carrie will get into that a little bit more, but I just want you to know that that they exist, and the town is working hard to keep up with it, and it's all focused on improving the situation around these issues. Another thing municipal governments in the area are doing is participating in what we call the Neponset Stormwater Partnership. This is a group organized by the Neponset River Watershed Association. Member towns are highlighted in that photo. And as you can see, Norwood is one of our members. And it's really a way for these towns to collaborate on these issues, to cross paths, to regularly meet, to sort of band together and collectively address them. They all have individual permits. They all have to individually do, the tasks that I'm talking about, but they're all kind of going through it together. So they learn from each other, they build off of each other. And then also our organization helps them with a few of the tasks as well. Particularly, a lot of these things are addressed through public engagement and outreach. And so we help them a lot with that. And we find it's helpful to have a regional approach to this stuff, so that people in different towns aren't getting different messages. We're all kind of working from the same knowledge base. And then the last thing that I want to touch on here before we move on to the next presenter is this idea of best management practices. I'll refer to them as BMPs from here on out, but basically what they are is they are structural installations that are designed to accept and improve stormwater in some way. It's really an umbrella term. There are many different types of BMPs. They have many different designed functions, but some way they're improving the situation. Some of them clean the stormwater, remove pollution. Some of them let the stormwater soak into the ground, thereby reducing the flooding. So they kind of improve a lot of the issues we're talking about tonight. And just an example, this is one that our organization worked on. This is actually an example from Canton. This was the original situation. A staff member from our group noticed these, I guess you'd call them little tree gardens kind of, that were just there. They were just an aesthetic installation. And he said, well, we could turn that into something for stormwater. So he worked with the town. They ripped them out and installed more accepting media, and then went ahead and repaved them, and then installed rain gardens, which is a term I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. Rain garden is a form of BMP. And now these 4 rain gardens accept this runoff from that paved play area. And it no longer, in normal circumstances, it doesn't flow past it. It soaks in right there. And the reason I bring these up is they are such a big tool for addressing a lot of these issues that our municipalities are pursuing. A lot of new construction, it's required to install something like this, but obviously we have a lot of old construction. Well, this is an example of where we can look at our old construction and find ways to install things like this that cut down on the water we are asking the storm drain system to accept and manage. So they're a wonderful tool, and something that I think you'll be hearing a lot more about as things progress, particularly if you participate in town meeting and everything. I think this is a big item that the towns can use going forward. But all of this, as I talk about this municipal stuff, I'm sure you're thinking, all of it takes money. It all takes funding. It takes staff time. It takes all that sort of stuff. So I am going to turn it over to Carrie. Carrie's going to talk to you a little bit about, she'll get into a little bit more detail and talk to you a little bit on, I think, funding mechanisms that these towns look into for these sort of things. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Carrie, it is all yours.
Great, thank you very much, Patrick. So I'm Carrie Snyder. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Neponset River Watershed Association. For all the reasons that Patrick just described, it's really important that we manage stormwater in the interest of the environment, public health, public safety, and really the welfare of everyone. And to that end, there are a few regulations that mandate certain minimum management strategies. And one of the most important for towns to comply with is one that Patrick mentioned. It's the Federal Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or the MS4 permit, which is jointly administered by the US EPA and MAPDP. So much of what Norwood and other towns do to manage stormwater is governed by this permit. And this permit takes its authority from the Federal Clean Waters Act. It identifies specific actions that towns have to take to maintain their stormwater management systems and reduce polluted runoff from getting into waterways. So the permit starts off, it provides for 6 minimum control measures. One is good housekeeping for municipal operations. It simply means that the town needs to make sure that their own properties are managing stormwater appropriately. Making sure that dumpsters are covered, salt piles are covered, that oil from vehicle maintenance yards is picked up before it enters the storm drain system, and managing the storm management system itself. So making sure they're cleaning out those catch basins, under those stormwater grates that Patrick was illustrating, and just making sure that everything is in good working order. Towns also have to actively seek out and remove any illicit discharges. And what that means is, if there's a sewer pipe next to a stormwater pipe, and as Patrick mentioned, our infrastructure is pretty old. We've been developed for a long time up here in the Northeast. And so sometimes those pipes get cracked, and so sewage can leak into the stormwater system. So what towns do is they go out and they test the waterways, the streams, and when they find contamination, bacteria, or excessive nutrients, they need to go out and make sure that there isn't something actually discharging. Anything that's not stormwater can't be discharged into the stormwater system. So when you find a leaky pipe, you go ahead and fix it. And they have to continually actively look for these illicit discharges. Towns also have to implement and enforce regulations to ensure that any sediment and erosion created by construction activities is kept out of the stormwater system. They also have to make sure that they implement and enforce regulations that ensure the installation and long-term maintenance of appropriate stormwater management systems on new and redeveloped property. So this is private property. And so that means towns have to establish conditions on development at the outset, and they have to enforce the maintenance of those stormwater systems in perpetuity to make sure that they work for the life of the BNP. And so this isn't just a one and done. This really does take staff time to manage these long term. Towns also have to do public education and outreach. Patrick went into this, and they just need to make sure that they're reaching residents, businesses, developers, and making sure that they are doing all that they can, and that they know what they can do to reduce pollution from getting into the stormwater system. And finally, towns have to engage the public. So everything the town is doing to comply with its MS4 permit is public. And your feedback is welcome. When the town updates its stormwater management plan, when they update rules and regulations or bylaws, your feedback is welcome, and you should participate as often as you can. Everything is on the website, so you can always contact the town to find out what they're doing about stormwater. And no one wants to think about the cost. So everything that I just mentioned costs a lot of money. And so one of the most important things we need to do is to make sure all of Norwood and the rest of the town's compliance efforts are adequately funded. They're integral to ensuring that we reduce stormwater flooding and make our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Ultimately, the responsibility for complying with the MS4 is to the town. The permit does not come with a check from the federal government. And existing stormwater costs are substantial, but they're often not clearly tracked in municipal budgets. So they're usually embedded within the DPW budget or spread across other departments that might have jurisdiction over certain activities. Oops, sorry about that. And the new MS4 went into effect in 2018. And while cost estimates can vary, it really represented significant increases, resulted in significant increases over previous budgets to manage stormwater. And then the climate change impacts, as Patrick said, include severe precipitation events. And these severe precipitation events are overwhelming our ancient infrastructure, and it increases flooding, and it increases the pollution that's reaching our streams. So most towns pay for stormwater management out of their general budgets. So they're coming out of property taxes. But stormwater and DPW budgets aren't sexy. So they don't usually garner the attention and the priority that they really deserve at town meeting budget discussions. But you'll definitely know when they're not working, and you'll know when the EPA comes around and does an audit and fines the town for not complying. So it's really important. I've used this picture several times, and this is right from downtown Norwood. And this happened last June. And this is what happens when the stormwater system functions as it's intended to do. Norwood's got a great system, and it was just a huge storm in a really short period of time, and it just completely overwhelmed the infrastructure. So again, towns are looking for ways to upgrade, and a lot of towns are starting to look into dedicated funding for stormwater systems. They're educating their residents that stormwater infrastructure is really the third and forgotten water utility that's provided, but not funded through dedicated fees. So just like water and sewer services, towns are looking at establishing enterprise funds and assessing utility fees, generally based on how much impervious surface a property has. And that more fairly captures, what it costs to deliver those stormwater management services to each property. The fees can also incentivize particularly large property owners to retrofit their properties and better manage stormwater. You think of the big box stores with huge parking lots. Perhaps they could retrofit some of that with some green infrastructure to make sure that they're capturing more of the stormwater before it enters into the town system. And stormwater utilities ensure adequate funding for stormwater and then free up money for other town priorities. So there are 22 towns in Massachusetts that have adopted a stormwater utility, and in the Neponset watershed, Milton is the first town to have done that. So all of this comes down to what can you do when it comes to these regulations. And so first and foremost, I would ask you to participate in town meeting, participate in your finance committee meetings, and make sure that stormwater operations, maintenance, and upgrades are funded. Support dedicated funding if it ever comes up in your town. Nobody wants to pay an additional fee, but now is the time we really need to start making these upgrades and these retrofits to make sure that we're prepared and that our communities are more resilient to these storm events. Support updated bylaws and regulations. As I said, the permit requires towns to have certain bylaws and regulations around construction and post-construction stormwater management. And at the spring town meeting in Norwood, town meeting will be taking up an update to the zoning law, the zoning bylaw, which incorporates many of those changes. After that, regulations are going to need to be updated. So I urge you to support that. If you're a town meeting member, support it. If you're not a town meeting member, then reach out to your town meeting members. And then finally, keep an eye out for action alerts from NEPRA and from other CRWA, from other environmental organizations, and look at what the state is evaluating. Look at what they're considering implementing. We've got a climate roadmap that I think is being taken up by the legislature today. Drought Management Act is coming up this session. Anytime MVP funding. I know Norwood was the first town in the Neponset watershed to go through the municipal vulnerability planning process to really look at what Norwood needs to do to adapt to climate change and make the community more resilient. So we need more funding to make sure that towns can actually implement those priority projects that they identified during the MVP planning process. So that's about it from me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them at the end. And now I'm going to let Holly take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you to everyone who's here and all the hosts who are putting this on. For folks who don't know, I think I see this most closely that Carrie and Patrick put in an incredible amount of work to help Norwood improve our stormwater and meet our MS4 permit requirements. And we're really lucky in Norwood to be a part of the Neponset Stormwater Partnership and to have NEPRA as a partner in helping us work on this. So I'm psyched to be presenting here with them tonight. I have a little something different but related to talk with you all about. And I am kind of giving an FYI of presenter, here we go, of some housekeeping that we're doing in the town just to make sure that we are not increasing our flood risk with new development. And to do that, in the spring, you're going to see coming up some changes to the floodplain overlay district in our zoning bylaw. I also just realized maybe I didn't introduce myself. I'm Holly. I'm the conservation agent and environmental planner for Norwood. So in our zoning bylaw, we have a floodplain overlay district, and there's two reasons that we have it. Number one, very easy to understand, we need to have it to qualify for national flood insurance. So every individual who needs national flood insurance, we are able to have that in our town because we're meeting some federal and state requirements through our floodplain overlay district. It's also very good for us to have it though, apart from sort of having this stick to have it, because having the district essentially reduces flood threats to people and to property and to emergency response officials, as well as reducing pollution. You can imagine when you get a large flood event that if there's more things in the floodplain, they're going to cause more pollution in the rivers. And flooding, of course, can cause big impacts to utility services and be generally very expensive and very dangerous. So we're looking at this district in the floodplain in Norwood. In Norwood, most of our floodplain is around rivers. Floodplain can be around the area that floods around any water body. So normally you have just a river flowing year round. It has its bed, it stays in its bed, and then you have a big storm event and boom, suddenly that river is much larger than it was before. The area that we're looking at specifically in terms of this bylaw and that FEMA actually regulates it's called the 100-year floodplain, which means there's a 1 in 100 chance that kind of the furthest area out on this floodplain is going to flood every year. And that's, they use the elevation and of the area to try and calculate that. And they use some of those older, sometimes precipitation models. So is it always going to be, oh, it floods once every 100 years? Of course not. And it's probably going to flood more than that as climate change continues apace. So you can actually see exactly in Norwood where the floodplain is. If you go to our town GIS, where I have the address up here on the slide, all the blue area is that 100-year floodplain, or the 1 in 100 chance of flooding every year. So you can see the airport, the whole airport is in that flood zone, and quite a bit in the south of the town as well. So those are all areas that are covered as part of this zoning overlay district. So your house, your business might be in residential or in commercial, and then if it's in this district, then it's also in the floodplain overlay district. It's just kind of put on top of everything else. Oh. Someone's calling me. Sorry. So right now, the bylaw reflects existing national and state laws. And the main thing that it does is try and prevent more fill in the floodplain. So you can imagine it's kind of like if you have a full cup and you keep putting pennies in it, it's going to spill over. Same idea of more fill in the floodplain. You don't want to keep putting more houses or more of anything in the floodplain, because that's going to make the water spill over everywhere else and flood further. And so what's changing is essentially adding more details like that tell the town what we need to do when something is happening in the floodplain, and make sure that we know what's happening in the floodplain and we're doing the right thing. So some of the changes are things like designating a specific person who's the go-to person who has their checklist and says, okay, you've done all of these things, all of the permits, you've shown that whatever project you're trying to do is not going to cause more flooding downstream, more flooding upstream. You built what you said you would build to the elevation that you said you would build it. And making sure that person is also in charge of notifying anyone who needs to be notified, like FEMA or the state. And so this applies to a lot of things. It applies to any kind of building in the floodplain, any kind of fill in the floodplain. Now, this isn't to say you can't have any building or any fill, but there's you're going to have to do certain things to get a permit for those. Make sure it meets the building code for the floodplain. Make sure if you have an RV in the floodplain, it's road ready. So if there's a flood, you can drive it out of there. Make sure if you have a fence, the water can flow through it instead of getting channeled somewhere else. Those are the kinds of things that we want to be looking at for these areas that are more likely to flood. On the other hand, there's some things that are allowed without having permits, agricultural uses, forestry, recreation, temporary structures, and any building that's already there. Of course, we're not going to say, take that away. So this is, again, going to be coming up in Springtown meeting. It's not any big changes, but it's changes to try and make sure that we know we're doing the right thing to protect the floodplain and make sure that we're not restricting water and causing more problems upstream or downstream for other folks. So if you have any questions about it, this is my contact info, and please reach out, or we have questions happening right now, I think. Thank you all.
Okay, my own technology is having a little bit of an issue there. Okay, thank you so much, you guys. As you guys were all talking and giving your pieces of the story, I'm just find myself nodding along over here, like, oh yeah, no, that's a really good point. Oh, that makes sense. And so everybody who is taking part tonight, feel free to go ahead, start typing questions, and I'll get to them as they come in. I have a couple of my own to kick off with. This is a kind of a clarification point, Patrick, this one's for you. You had mentioned, don't use fertilizer, but if you do want to check the health of your soil and your lawn, use a soil meter. The library lends out a variety of different things in our library of things. One of them is a soil meter. It measures moisture, pH, that sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about when you recommend that?
That could be a start, particularly the pH, because what you're looking at, what you want to find out is what the nutrients your lawn already has. Mm-hmm. Because if you're putting extra fertilizer in there that you don't need, number one, it's just going to run off in the stormwater, and number two, you're wasting your money. So why do that? pH is a big part of that. That affects how the nutrients are available. But really, actually, what I'm referring to is a soil test where you collect a sample and you send it to a lab, and they give you a report saying exactly what you need. And a really good program for that is run by UMass Amherst. So if that's something you're interested in, just go to their website and Google soil testing lab, and it, they'll set you up with getting that taken care of.
I'll add that I've done this, and it was great to figure out the nutrients in my soil, and also to figure out if I had lead in my soil before I started gardening in it. So good thing to do all around.
And actually, that's a good segue into another question I had jotted down while you guys were talking. So whoever wants to take this one, if somebody, knows that they might live in a floodplain or near a floodplain, or they just know from the giant storm that we had in June that their property is susceptible to some extreme weather events, what are some steps that people could take on their own properties to help before the water all runs off of their property and into the street and into the storm management system? Are the different landscaping trends that people could investigate? Are there any recommendations and resources you would recommend looking into for managing people's own property, even from plantings, making your own rain garden, what have you?
I can start with this question. There's a lot of different options. One of the easiest to start with is changing what you're planting. So if you're planting maybe just all grass, maybe you want to consider adding some shrubs or some trees. And those are going to do a good job of holding soil together, absorbing moisture, making sure that they'll catch rain and direct it toward their root systems, and kind of keep it contained rather than running off. Some other things that I see being used include things like permeable pavement, which could be as simple as if you're making a patio, maybe you make your patio with bricks instead of with just straight concrete. So now the rain has somewhere to seep in between those things rather than running straight off. There's all kinds of different permeable pavements for all different types of uses. Infiltrating your roof drains, building rain gardens like was talked about. And then I think depending on your flooding situation. If you're in the floodplain, there could be other this is like kind of less ecological, but if you need to get water away from your house, then you might want to look at like French drains into your rain garden, or grass swales into your rain garden, or something along those lines. Carrie or Patrick, do you have anything to add to that?
That really covered everything that I can think of. I think that was good.
Great. So expanding out from there, some questions are rolling in and they're expanding the scope of what we're talking about. So this has been great, somebody says, so thank you very much. So what do you see as the biggest challenges in Norwood specifically, but also generally, biggest challenges to better managing stormwater and building climate resilience at the municipal level? Biggest challenges.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is simply, our infrastructure is really old and it's completely undersized. We really need to be looking at sort of forward-thinking projections of precipitation, and we need to find the resources to be able to evaluate what's there. Storm drain pipes. We're looking at culverts, stream crossings, and see what needs to be upgraded to make sure that we can manage this. In Norwood and other towns, we're also looking at other hazards and mitigating those hazards from stormwater, dams that have fallen into disrepair. There are a lot of things, and Norwood, and actually most of the towns now in the Neponset River watershed have gone through a process to identify some of the major issues that they need to address to make their communities more resilient through the MVP process. So I encourage everybody to go look at your town's MVP report, look at what the priorities are, and encourage towns to apply for grants from the state and elsewhere to implement some of those priority projects. I mean, again, for Norwood and elsewhere, it comes down to resources. These things are really expensive. We're sort of behind the 8 ball now, and so anything we can do to support the towns in doing these infrastructure upgrades, I think would be a huge help. Patrick or Holly?
I think that covered it really well, and I'd echo something Carrie said earlier too. To go along with that is the competition for resources is a big challenge too. Carrie mentioned that stormwater and this infrastructure can be kind of the third forgotten utility. We've got water and sewer that we all know we use every day, but often we don't think about this utility until we have a problem. And so that kind of competition in our minds and in our thinking can be a big hurdle as well.
That actually leads to a question that I had thought of. The MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Report, do you know where residents could go to find that? Is that on the town's website, or is that something the NRWA keeps on file for the public?
Yeah, we have a copy of our action plan report on the town website, and everyone is welcome to email me to dig up the link for you. Great. So even if Norwood is an does have MWRA water, and will be able to bathe and drink, isn't drought bad for the local ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. My reason in mentioning that, I guess, was that in towns that maybe don't have MWRA water, that are taking the local water and using it, it's almost more exacerbated because we're using more water and we're not getting as much, so it's like a double hit. Norwood using MWRA water, it helps, but yes, the Norwood is going to experience a drought at the same time every other town does. This past summer, it was no different, and it was not much different in Norwood than it was from Dedham or anywhere else that has more local water. So yes, they would feel the effects, and even more than that, anyone upstream that's not conserving water, Norwood's going to feel the effects of that as well. So yes, it's all around a problem.
Feel free to ask any last minute questions. I have maybe one or two more of my own, but if you have a question, folks, now is the time to chime in with it. I'm just curious, do we know, Holly, how did the flood damage from June compare to the floodplain map that we do have on file that we're working with?
I think the flood damage from June was much more extensive than the floodplain map that we're working with. The June flood was much larger than a 100-year storm event, and flooded. The floodplain is mostly around rivers, right? And we saw flooding in town this past summer that was nowhere close to a river. And part of that was because the storm drain system itself got overwhelmed. And so the storm drain system is trying to drain to the river. There's nowhere for it to drain to, and it just keeps filling up and spreading out onto the streets. So moving things out of the floodplain and into the streets. So much more extensive than this area that we're looking at protecting now. So, yeah.
And then I'm sure that we have some folks wondering about next steps. So what can people who are here tonight do? What is the next thing that people can walk away tonight and do to help out checking out different pieces of legislation on the table for town meeting, or getting, hands in the mud, so to speak, getting helping out, volunteering in some way? Who has some ideas for that?
Contact us at neponset.org. We are a member-supported organization, and we really do rely on our volunteers. It's volunteers who go out and do the water quality testing. We have other volunteer activities. People are going out and marking storm drains to make people more aware of where storm drains are and what they are, and that they lead directly to the river. I'm recruiting people to go to Lobby Day with me. It's a virtual Lobby Day at the State House on the 18th. So you can shoot me an email and I'll let you know how to register, and you can talk directly with your legislators through Zoom and tell them why water resources are important to you and what you'd like to see them prioritize. Get on our email list. We always send out action alerts when there's a specific piece of legislation that we'd love you to contact your legislator about, and even local issues. Stuff coming up at town meeting that we think is really important, or specific inappropriate development that might be going on in your town that could exacerbate some of these issues. So, so please visit neponset.org, or you can email me at snyder@neponset.org. I can stick that in the chat.
I would say locally, one thing that I'm interested in looking at is identifying sites for green infrastructure like rain gardens. So it could be a municipal site like a school, like we saw in the slideshow, or it could be not a municipal site, like maybe your church or wherever your scout troop meets is in an area that you think you could build a rain garden or build a vegetated swale or something like that. I think looking for opportunities like those is one thing that I would be interested in working with folks with. I can also announce, you heard it here first, that the town and the Neponset River Watershed Alliance are doing a cleanup for Earth Day on April 17th at the Saint Lot, right at the confluence of Hawesbrook and the Neponset. So you can keep an eye out for that. It's going to be just kind of a trash pickup to get it before it gets in the river, that we would love to see you all out for.
Very cool. And there's one question that came in. And by the way, thank you very much, Carrie, for throwing some links and some information into the chat. So folks, if you're curious at all, make sure you grab that information while you can for the Mass Rivers Alliance Lobby Day and Neponset River Watershed contact information. Now, even though this is a specific question, it kind of seems like we all know somebody who's in like a very specific situation. So in that way, it is somewhat applicable to many people. You know, somebody has a neighbor whose house was flooded and the lower windows were actually blown out during the flood in June. There is a spring, a natural spring under that property. So there's kind of a confluence of different factors in that case. What sort of thing could be done for existing properties like that?
I think that's a question to ask a contractor or someone who's really skilled in architecture. I've been trying to learn more about the floodplain zoning. I've been learning more about floodplain building codes, and there are ways to build buildings so that water can actually flow through them if you're ever in a flood condition like that, rather than blowing out the window in order to get out. So that might be something to look into, but it's unfortunately not my area of expertise.
We need an engineer in the house. Yeah. Oh, actually, here is another good point about point of contact for the town of Norwood. I remember I was one of the folks who was going around to residences who did have damage during the June storm, and some folks were trying to find out who should they report something to if they do think that there's a stormwater issue with drains near their house, or development in the area has changed stormwater flow and they just want to check in with somebody at the town level about that. Who should they reach out to?
The DPW is generally responsible for the maintenance of the stormwater system. So if it's a maintenance issue, then they would be the folks to reach out to.
We also have a stormwater hotline at NEPRA, so that and we can help find the proper person in each town. So if you're not from Norwood, you know, you can go to yourcleanwater.org and you can report an issue, and that'll come to us, and we can help get it to the right person.
That's great. All right, I think that's our evening, everybody. We got a little bit over the hour, but you know, we love talking about this sort of stuff. So thank you so much to our presenters for your time and your expertise and putting so much work into that presentation. That was so much data. And you cited all of your sources, which as a librarian, I was thrilled to see. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it, and help us continue the conversation and take action if you are so inspired to take action. And we'll see you around. Have a great Earth Day if I don't see you before then. And have a great weekend, folks.